Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. According to Sun Yu in his new book, Friction, Adding Value by Making People Work for It, the idea of friction as a uniformly bad thing that needs to be rooted out and eliminated is too simple, two-dimensional. Sun has poured a lifetime experience with major brands, startups, and consulting into a very thought-provoking work, helping us understand that in many instances, a bit of friction, a few speed bumps, are a good thing, and it can actually help build customer engagement and loyalty.
But to be commensurate with the effort you put in, you want to feel like, hey, the program itself is considered. It is actually, it's not an auto answer. It's actually something where it reflects the effort you put into it, and therefore it's going to put in the right amount of effort to match that. And so they sometimes put up the processing bar, the little time bar that goes across the screen to show you that, hey, they're checking every single box.
Sun, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
Oh, thanks for the invite, Michael. Excited to be joining you on this.
Well, I've been looking forward to chitting and chatting. I had an advance copy of your book, and we'll get to talking about that. Where am I finding you today?
I am in the San Francisco Bay Area. We've
kind of jumped right in. Let's start at the beginning. Tell us about yourself, your background. You've got an interesting background in everything from you've got consulting, lots of packaged goods stuff, and lots of interesting things. So give us a quick overview of who you are and how you got where you are and what you do.
Yeah. So, I always start with sort of the big picture of it all. And I would probably say that I'm a brand anthropologist, and probably a better term would be I'm a brand nerd. I've always been very curious about how brands and people form relationships, and how especially the brands that we love the most, we fall in love with those brands. And always felt that as brand caretakers, those of us fortunate enough to actually be working on brands and products and creating those relationships with the folks, that is really important as a brand caretaker to make sure that we never gave consumers a reason to fall out of love with the brand or ever to be on the fence on the brand. And so that curiosity led to lots of questioning, lots of questions that I had, and also a journey in terms of working on brands on so many different levels. As you mentioned, I started early in my career as a consultant, realized I wasn't very good at that because I probably had more questions than I had answers. And, especially when you're a young consultant, I don't know. I suffer from a lot of imposter syndrome. I'm like, I don't know how to, I'm 20-some years old. I don't know how to tell a 40-year-old what to do. And I quickly realized that maybe I needed a little more training. So I ended up going back into business school, which quite frankly still didn't provide me the answers that I needed. And it wasn't until I left business school and worked for Clorox, which is a huge consumer products company. Yeah, they sell everything from Combat Roach Killer to Hidden Valley Ranch, but of course they sell the full line of cleaning products and laundry care products. And I had the fortune of being able to work on one of the sexiest brands in the portfolio, toilet bowl cleaners.
There's a lot that goes into those things, man. Let me tell you, they got to stick to the sidewalls. I mean, there's a lot that go in, right?
Oh, let me tell you, I was a hit at most cocktail parties talking about soap scum and mold and mildew, and
I just use your washroom, and can I give you my card? Because really, Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I judge people at a totally microscopic level that they'd never think about, right? Yeah. So no, but in the process of managing probably the unsexiest brand in the portfolio, I realized that it didn't matter how honest, like kids, you don't really care how unattractive or out of shape your kid is. You're going to give them the best opportunity for a great education. You're going to feed them well. You're going to get them off to school every morning. You're going to do everything you can, and it's because it's your kid. And I think by having to work on something like toilet bowl cleaners, it taught me the intrinsic reason why people love brand management, and that's the sense of ownership that you get from being able to, make decisions that both impact the health of the brand, but also, again, that relationship with the consumers. Then I had a whole bunch of stuff. I said, well, okay, now I learned so much here at Clorox and in business school, and a lot of things I probably shouldn't be doing in consulting. And I kind of wanted to apply that against a real life example and a crucible, which is, let's do a startup. Let's take all these ideas and see if they actually work in a real life case study, which is a startup. And I have done probably 7 or 8 startups in my life. And I can just say, for the record, most of them failed. A couple were successful.
You don't need a lot of them to be successful, right? I mean,
a few, yes. But, if you look at my wiki profile, it will actually state that I, or at least one of the businesses I created, was the poster child for web excess and stupidity. So I actually am personally branded as one of the biggest failures you'll ever meet, Michael.
Is that how you wound up? In addition to a Webby Award, you wound up with a Dope Award. Tell me about the Dope Award.
Well, yeah, we created, that was for when I was working for Chiquita. And we had created, our goal was to take something as, let's say as mundane as bananas, and try to create some real engagement with a younger customer base, because we had been, let's say, our customers had been kind of growing a lot older, and we wanted to reconnect with the younger base. And so we created a Ida Chiquita website, and it was very interactive. It really celebrated the idea of our heritage, but also, the health and the character of bananas in American lifestyle. And one of the things we did that won a lot of these awards was using a web interactive tool. We let people recreate one of the most iconic signatures of the Chiquita brand, which is the logo. Right. And so, and then we, for the winning designs, which we had quite a few, we actually changed the logo for about 3 or 4 months to all those different designs. So not only were
that's a big deal in the packaged goods world, right? I mean, that's like an anathema. You guard that with your professional lives, right?
Absolutely. And so the fact that we were allowed to play with it, and it's not only we were allowed to play, but with our customers, and the younger customer base was allowed to sort of recreate it, make it their own, invest some good friction against reimagining it. It really brought the life back to the brand and made it highly relevant with our consumers again. And so that's why a lot of those awards were won. But just to kind of go full circle to why you have me on the program is that kind of led me to most of my failures led me to the question of, why are all these great brands, doing it differently and better than I could do it? And I researched 50 companies that had really earned the status of becoming iconic. They had stood the test of time. They were distinctive. They were relevant, and they had longevity and became the standard bearer for that distinctive relevance. And I kind of reverse engineered the intentional strategies that they took to become iconic. And so it was the strategies, it was the principles, and it was the best practices. And I put that into a book. And it was a very successful book for me. It's called Iconic Advantage. And
that was your first book, right? This is your second book?
Yeah, and the second book was actually based on experiences from activating the first book. After I'd launched that, a lot of businesses brought me in to help them figure out how they might become more iconic. And one of the first steps we always look at is there something unique or distinctive about you? And we call that noticing power. And one of the keys in noticing power is first understand who you are, and then what is it about you that is unique or different or special versus the competition. And is it relevant,
right? I mean, back to your consulting days, I would often draw a matrix to say, well, this is differentiation and this is relevancy. And you don't want to be in the really different but irrelevant category, right? So you got to watch out for that, right?
You nailed it. Actually, so we talked about the first one is distinction, but don't be different just for difference sake. The second quality that you need, there's 3 qualities. The second quality is we call staying power, and it's related to relevance. It's actually, are you relevant yesterday? Are you relevant today? And will you be relevant 100 years from now? And that's the whole idea of staying power in terms of relevance. And the last is just getting universal recognition for that distinctive relevance. And you can, being distinctive is not enough. Whatever that distinction is, it has to be relevant. And the trick, or not the trick, but the key goal is to have longevity with that. Because if you don't,
that's the hard part, right? Because you wind up creating differentiation, but then it gets adapted quickly, and then it becomes table stakes. Now you've created something that's not differentiated anymore. The market or competitors or the world has caught up to you. Now you got to keep going, right? It's a very iterative process. Yeah.
I should have interviewed you to write the book. You nailed it, man. You've exactly summarized the entire book. Is all about exactly what you just said. And by the way, on the idea of distinction, part of it is if you have something distinctive that you own, it's great to encapsulate it and embody it in a signature element. Let me give you a simple example. Corona is a great beer, and it's distinctive for a couple reasons, but one of the most distinctive parts of it, and in fact, Corona is kind of naked without it, is the lime in the neck. Because what the lime in the neck does, it is a signature element for the brand that brings the consumer back to the idea that this is your vacation beer. This is your, beach beer. And so Corona's kind of naked without that signature element. The Air Max from Nike, it always has that little pocket of air, because that pocket of air will never lose its buoyancy, whereas most trainers lose about 40% of their support. And so, these are the idea of signature elements. And one of the most powerful types of signature elements is the idea of a signature experience. And when I started to look at these signature experiences, the world was going seamless and going frictionless and trying to kind of reduce the time you spend.
That was the mantra. It continues to be the mantra. That continues to be the mantra, which is why I was so interested to dive into your book. Exactly. That part about friction. So the book is, just so we don't leave our listeners behind, the book is Friction, Adding Value by Making People Work For It. Now, it's your second book, as you said. Talk about you're kind of introducing, you're getting to the origin story of the book, but what compelled you to take your first book to the next level? Or was that a natural progression for you?
It wasn't planned. It was one of those things where I was helping a lot of the clients kind of develop great signature elements for their brand distinction. And in the process of doing that, I realized that to do it well required friction. It required you to make your customers pause, stop, think, sometimes consider and actually actively make a yes or no choice, oftentimes exhibiting or exerting a little bit of sweat and sweat equity in order to get to the place where the signature experience made you remember them, made them look forward to experience again. Let me give you a simple example that both is about a signature experience, but it's also the idea of what is good friction and what is bad friction. So let's take the idea of opening a package, and I'm going to share a bad friction example, and I'll share a good friction example. So you and I think, here's a product. USB, a USB flash drive that, maybe, 2 gigabytes, right? And when we purchase it, we go to a Best Buy or we're buying on Amazon, and it arrives and it is inside a huge, about 10x the size of the little flash drive, plastic clamshell. We have to take our scissors, we have to cut it open. And even then it's so well melded together that we have to use our fingernails and fingers to try to pry it open. And designed for loss prevention, right? It's designed for loss prevention in a physical store, right? It's like the old CDs, right? Remember the old CDs that come in this massive case? Talk about friction, right? Bad friction, right? So, but there's another company that actually makes you take more than 2 minutes. Oftentimes, I think the average in terms of spending time trying to unpack their product is 20 to 30 minutes. Or when you're thinking, what? You're taking 20, 30 minutes out of my life to unpack your stupid product? Well, during Christmas, my son got his Apple Watch, and the 20 or 30 minutes it took him to unpackage that, to set it up, to put his name in it, to customize it, to choose a color scheme, to choose, different types of screen designs. Before it was fully set up, those are probably the 30 best minutes of Christmas for him. Okay. And, I always ask when I'm doing a keynote, I always ask the audience, how many people bought an Apple product? How many of you, those that have their hands up, which is 99% of the audience, have actually kept one of the packages? Not a single hand goes down. And then I say, okay, well, how many have kept 2? How many have kept 3? I've gotten up to where somebody had 18 packages. So, Michael, 18 packages. I said, what do you do with 18 packages?
I probably have half that, at least half that many here. I mean, it's a fascinating observation. I mean, it gets to this point of another moment of truth in the buying. I think like a retail, it's another moment of truth in the buying purchase process, right? Not only you've made a couple of decisions, you've made the decision to buy it, it arrives, and then that experience is very important, right?
It's one of the most critical. And so the way Apple looked at it is, you know what? This is about a treasure and a treasure chest. And it's the idea of trying to unlock a treasure chest. It shouldn't be that simple. There should be keys, there should be straps, and then, to get to the best part of the treasure. You open up, there's treasure, but then you got to dig a little deeper to find the big, let's call it the big emerald that's sort of, buried underneath there somewhere, right? Yeah. And so that is the concept that they use to create their packaging. And it requires a lot of effort, time, consideration, sweat to get through those 30 minutes. But those are 30 minutes that people cherish. And
you give another example that's really interesting on a different context. I think it was tax software, but it's this idea of benevolent deception. In other words, let's put some speed bumps in here to just slow things down. And I call it sometimes, have you heard the term soak time? Let me just understand what's happening. So let's put some speed bumps in the way. Is that another, there are two sides of the same coin, so to speak, but talk about that for a bit.
Yeah, well, that's a certain type of deceptive friction, but it's this idea that, there are times where inconveniences actually create greater assurance. Okay. So in TurboTax, a lot of times, you put in all your information and you probably spend a long time doing that, right? Well, the answer is already done for you. And so you get the answer instantaneously. But to be commensurate with the effort you put in, you want to feel like, hey, the program itself is considered. It is actually, it's not an auto answer. It's actually something where it reflects the effort you put into it, and therefore it's going to put in the right amount of effort to match that. And so sometimes they put up the processing bar, the little time bar that goes across the screen to show you that, hey, they're checking every single exception for you, right? And because you're different from customer A, B, or C, you're customer you're Michael, right? We're gonna, just like a real tax consultant's gonna do, we're gonna customize our answer for you. And so those 5 or 10 seconds that you see are happening, it gives you this sense that, hey, whatever I did previously, it's actually put to good use. And whatever answer I'm going to get that's going to come out of it was actually one that was well considered.
So it's so interesting. And you give lots of great, it's one of the things I love about the book. You give lots of great examples. And by the way, your book reminded me of another book that's out, Dan Pink's The Power of Regret, right? Where it turns the kind of idea in his book, The Power of Regret, to the positive. You turn the power of friction, you even create the power of friction, which is interesting. What are the most, as you draw from the many, many examples from the book, what are the most counterintuitive, most powerful examples that you can share with retailers about, put friction, because it is a drive to eliminate friction, at the checkout, eliminate friction everywhere. But give me some counterintuitive examples that really stood out to you.
Well, I'll start with one that may be less specific to retail, but it is about building relationships. And obviously part of that is building relationship with your customers. But it's sort of central to the idea that you want to make your customers work for it, right? And I talk about it in the chapter of building rapport. Building rapport requires actually a certain amount of friction from both parties. Rapport is in the simplest form a sense of connection. And I talk about the story of Benjamin Franklin. As you know, he was a legislator, a politician, and he had another adversary who was on the other side of the political spectrum, who really hated him. Okay. And he was trying to figure out, well, how do I get close to this guy? Well, you kind of go through maybe we have a shared interest. And so he found a shared interest. The natural reaction on the shared interest might be, well, I'm going to do him a favor. And, I know he has a shared interest, so I'm going to do something related to that shared interest on his behalf and something that he'll find favorable, right? Well, Benjamin Franklin took the opposite attack. He said, you know what? We both like books. We both have incredible libraries. And I also know that he has this one rare book that nobody else has, and I don't have either. And I'm going to ask him to borrow that book. Right? And you think, what? That's how you're going to get close to somebody? And the adversary guy, he's kind of like, well, you want to borrow what? And he thought about it. He goes, well, man, you like books. Okay, that's a form of connection. But instead of giving me your best book, you're asking for my best book? But hey, that means you actually know that is my best book. You know that's a prized possession for me. And you appreciate that. And now I see you in a little bit different light already. And enough of a light where, okay, I'm going to lend you the book. And that's what happened. That guy lended the book to Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin borrowed it for a little while, returned it with a note of thanks, and obviously with some of his thoughts, as if you and I had seen a movie together and afterwards we're having a coffee. That's kind of what happened, right? He shared some of his insights about this incredibly rare book. And after that day, they became best buddies and best friend legislators. And you got to think about this. One of the ways to get close to somebody isn't to do a favor for them. It's to actually ask a favor of them. Now, there's an art to asking for good favors. Okay. You can't just randomly ask any favor.
Got to be thoughtful, as it was in your example, right? Very thoughtful and very, very, in some ways, personal. An intersection of the personal and the professional.
It is. So one of the first things you want to do is ask for something that might actually flatter the other person in terms of, you have something that I either want, something that I need, something that of value that, if you could give me just a little bit of help on that or a little bit of assistance there. The second part of it is it would go a long way to help me and improve my lot and make my life better. So think about it this way. Something important to that person that they can give without too much effort that would go a long way in making your life different, better, or changed or impacted in some way. And then what happens is once they've done this favor, you need to let them know that the favor was not only appreciated, but it led to a positive outcome for you. Because what happens then is all of a sudden, you are now not only part of my consideration set, but I've just invested against your success. And therefore, your future success is something that I actually have some ownership over. And so guess what? If you ask for a second favor kind of related to the first one, I'm definitely going to help you because I already saw the progress on that one. And guess what? You're now part of my universe. And that's what happens when you ask for favors. People become vested in you and your success and their ability to help you achieve that. You know, one of the things I love about being a speaker or a consultant is it's very satisfying on a couple levels. One is that, I'm able to help people. But the other thing that I think is so important, this is why, asking for a favor of somebody, it sort of hits on this. I like being needed. I like being appreciated. And I think if most people look at it, if they're in the right work environment, part of it is that you're helping people, but part of it is that you're needed and you're wanted and that you're desired. That is as much I want to use the word aphrodisiac, but as much of an inspiration as actually being able to help somebody.
Like adversity, a little bit is good, too much is very bad. So let's step back and understand from your framework. You've got some frameworks in the book. I guess we're also kind of calling back on your stint in consulting, but you also worked for some big brands who would have thought through, everything from product value ladders to all these things. As retailers and others who are listening kind of unpack their value chain and say, there's some elements that could benefit from friction and some that wouldn't. Is there a model that they could take from your book and kind of apply to help them understand basically how to apply the principles that you outline and give plentiful examples of in the book.
Yeah. So let me give you the sort of the basic outline and the framework, and then I'll talk about this idea of adversity and when is too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just it's a simple kind of mnemonic. We really think about the idea of good and bad friction, and the simple definition of friction itself is added effort, investment, consideration, etc. Right? The difference between good and bad is that this added effort and investment leads to a bad outcome. That's bad friction. Whereas an added effort or extension or investment that leads to a good outcome, that's good friction. And to get there, the key with good friction is that it is required to create what I call happy chemicals. This is dopamine. Think of it as the reward and anticipation chemical that hits your brain. Oxytocin, that's the one where it's about social connection. Some people call it the love chemical that we feel when we're bonding with people. Serotonin, it's the one where our competitive juices are sort of fired up, and it's the kind of recognition and reward mechanism that gets triggered with serotonin. Endorphin, think of it as sort of the painkiller one, right? Where if you push yourself to the limit, that kicks in and it takes over.
And then
the last one I call is adrenaline. Okay, and so you want good friction because it elicits those happy chemicals. And so when you think about your retail environment, are you actually creating an environment that really triggers those happy chemicals? And if you're doing it right, you can actually trigger 7 potential virtues, good virtues that come from good friction. That's everything from engagement, meaning, belonging, rapport, assurance, competence, and exclusivity. And if you put that all in one big sort of thing to remember, we highly encourage you to embrace a dose of good friction. Embrace stands for those 7 virtues of engagement, meaning, belonging, rapport, assurance, competence, and exclusivity. A dose stands for adrenaline, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And when you embrace a dose of good friction, you will get those happy chemicals, and it will lead to those 7 virtues. That's the book in a nutshell.
By chapter. Actually, that's a book by chapter, right? You got a chapter dedicated to basically each of those. Yeah.
And the last, I want to address your question about this idea of, is too much friction good or bad, or too much adversity? And I think the thing with bad friction is it's more easy to achieve bad friction than it is good friction. Here's why. Good friction can be a bit fleeting. It can be very much contextual. And you could do something that, let's say, you're asking extra effort for somebody, and in the right environment, it's very engaging. They're very much willing to make that investment. But let's say, oftentimes we have 2 modes. We have our normal mode, and then we have our stress mode, right? Sometimes we get into that stress mode where we're just overwhelmed, overloaded. Well, almost any type of good friction you put into somebody that is in their stress mode actually becomes bad friction, just because they don't have the bandwidth to process what you need. They're kind of the flight or fight right now kind of mindset. And so anything you introduce that's good friction normally will actually turn into bad friction. So friction is within context. And so that you just have to think about, if I'm adding more effort for my customers that come into my store or on my website, is it creating the right happy chemicals, and are they in the right context to be able to receive that good friction? So it does create those happy chemicals. So that's probably the one thing I'd say about it. You have to think about, it's not too much or too little. Is it in the right context?
Context. That's very, very useful. So last question for you. I can't have someone of your experience and thoughtfulness on the mic where we don't talk a little bit about the amount of friction and what we went through, or in some ways still going through in the COVID era. What are you thinking around consumer behavior, business structures that may have changed structurally as opposed to kind of, accommodations to a weird time in our life? I ask a lot of people this question as we think and reflect on the past couple of years. What in your mind, if anything, has changed from your way of thinking or from the way that consumers behave pre-COVID?
Yeah, and I would probably think about it on 2 levels. One is obviously from the consumer customer, but the other is really staff and employees. And there's probably two simple behaviors. On both of those audiences or those populations, they have more options. And part of those options are to not be physically engaged with you, right? And they can be virtually engaged with you. And I'm not saying anything that no one knows. You need to be able to provide both options. Then you need to think about, if you're providing both options, what's the context and what's the role of each option relative to each other and relative to serving your business model and building your brand.
Mm-hmm. I don't think we've all figured that out yet, right? I talked to a lot of
No, I don't think so. But I have some thoughts on at least a couple of these. Okay, so on the employee part, I actually think that, this hybrid work is, I just think that is probably going to become the norm if it's not the norm already. Just because if one company provides hybrid and another doesn't, over time, okay, as people come into the marketplace, they're going to probably veer a little more towards having that flexibility. Okay, so you need to assume that at some point you're probably going to have that hybrid model. And then I think the question needs to be, what is the reason people could benefit from being together physically? What are those situations? And are you thinking about not forcing people to go back to work, but making it kind of compelling to want to actually be physically back at work? Because I don't think being fully virtual is actually healthy. And I don't think actually being fully physical is actually realistic. So this idea of hybrid is here to stay. And if it is hybrid, then what is the role that you design? And so people have been innovating a lot on the virtual workspace and Slack and all these, apps are coming out. I think there needs to be a whole set of innovation about innovating in-person work. What would actually make me super interested to come in? What are, is this company
and where, right? Is it still the office? Does it need to be the same physical environment, which sometimes creates friction for people, right? We call that a commute.
Oh, it definitely creates friction.
Particularly where you are and where I am in Toronto. Commutes are pretty evil, right?
Is that a time when people actually get together and ideate? Is it a time where people get together and they actually physically present ideas to each other and have a discourse that you really can't have in a Zoom environment, where 20 people trying to, Is it an environment where, quite frankly, you're required to go to lunch with people you don't know that well? And we'll pay for it. What? And then all of a sudden you're building a rapport and network. Is this a time where, we encourage people, we're going to work on culture, we're going to, live our values, we're going to do training. What is it that is actually compel people to think of FOMA, fear of missing out? It's not because you're forcing me to come back. I love coming into work, and in fact, I miss coming to work because so many cool things are happening. And so you just have to think, what's the role of in-person work, and how do we innovate it in a way that actually creates people compelled to want to come? I think the same principle is related to the physical store environment. It shouldn't just be an option because, hey, it was on my way to work or on my way home, or, I was just happened to be at the mall. And so, I kind of inadvertently ended up at your store. You have to think about, what are the compelling reasons to get people to come physically back into your store that then touches on those happy chemicals.
Well, the book is Friction, Adding Value by Making People Work for It. Soon, how can people, that's available today. I'll put links in the show notes. How can people get in touch with you? Are you a LinkedIn person, or what's the best way to reach out to you if they have questions or want to chat, and maybe even talk about your speaking gigs and all that great stuff?
Yeah, honestly, I love working with people, and if you just want to talk to me, I'm happy to do that. If you want to hire me, of course, I'm happy for that too. And the easiest way to get a hold of me is you can just go to my website. It's just my name, Soon, SOONUYU.com. That's probably the easiest. But of course, I am probably the only Soon You on LinkedIn also. And and if you type in Soon You on Google, you'll get one of my links somewhere. Then you should be fine. But yeah, I thank you so much, Michael, for so many thoughtful questions, and I love talking about what you're so passionate about, and I think we could nerd out on this for many hours. So this has been fun.
No, this has been a real treat. It's been great to chit and chat with you. It's a great book. I recommend it to anybody who is anywhere remotely interested in what we've had to say. But in general, I think it's a great read. And congratulations, and thanks for joining me on the podcast. And I wish you safe travels and continued success.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thanks for tuning into this special episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and click and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically twice a week. And check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Conversations with Commerce Next podcast, and the Food Professor podcast with Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my all-new YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of Emmy LeBlanc Company and Maven Media. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at emmyleblanc.co. Have a safe week, everyone.